before we actually get into some of the stuff around manifestation, we have to have a context and an understanding of what is going on before we can really understand why these tools work, and also why they're so difficult and why a lot of people don't use them very well. Okay, so most of us are familiar with the default mode network. That's the place in the brain where identity lives. And when we have issues, they're usually based in this default mode, where as we grew up developmentally as children, we learned to think and feel and believe a certain way. And that is what gets loaded into the default mode network. That is what creates the sense of identity that we have. So the default mode network is the identity that has taken on certain thoughts and beliefs in childhood. And we also know that through the use of psychedelics, we can dissolve these networks, at least temporarily, and put the default mode on hold or break it up some, so that we get different perspectives about life and about our life. So what happens when we are challenged developmentally as children? A traumatized DMN defaults to negative beliefs about self and others, misperceptions, and severe self-judgment, which we call the inner critic. So we know that about the default mode. And Sarah Payton has done some wonderful research on this. So when traumatized people default, they were automatically default to negative thinking, self-blame, and abuse, rather than to neutrality. Whenever we have conscious activity, however, the conscious activity can stop and break up that default mode. And when that conscious activity stops, when we go back to just relaxing, the negative self-abuse and blame will start up again. And she says the more emotional pain a person has survived, the more likely it is for the default mode to be toxic. Okay. So there is another network in the brain. It's the dorsal attention network, which breaks the spell of the default mode. So when we focus on a new skill, and it can be anything, like a video game or a creative project, or we're doing some focused meditation, or we may be involved in an addiction, we're actually breaking up the default mode network. So essentially, where this goes is that we all have a choice. So we can be in the unconscious default mode network, suffering part of our brain, or we can choose to move over to Dan. And some of us move over to Dan in ways that are addictive. So we can use food or other objects of addiction. We can distract ourselves with video games or forms of entertainment. We can just get on the internet and cruise through Facebook, that kind of thing. We are distracting ourselves from the suffering of the unconscious default mode. Okay. The third possibility is that we can choose to focus this network on our healing, or put our focus on our healing. So in this particular program, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how we can use this focus of this neural pathway here to focus on a specific aspect of healing, which we're going to call deliberate creation. So that's where the law of attraction comes in. And there are other laws besides the law of attraction that are engaged in this whole complex that we call manifestation. But essentially, if we go back and we look and we understand that it's the dorsal attention network that we're engaging when we do this, it helps us a little bit in understanding what we're doing. But you have to be aware that this dorsal attention network is putting the default mode network on hold temporarily so that when we relax this, this will come back. So it doesn't help it or it doesn't replace it, right? Except for in certain conditions, which we're going to go into. We're going to learn how we can actually use this dorsal attention network, this very focused, deliberate creation to begin to reprogram some of this default mode. All right. So that's the big question is, can we create a different default mode network? Essentially, to create a different default mode network means that we have to create a different identity. And when we're creating a different identity, we're actually creating a different reality. So I can't live in my present identity and create a different reality. That's an impossibility. In order for me to get results externally, I actually have to create a different identity. And that's the key important concept to get throughout this whole course. So how do we do this? How do we create a different default mode identity? How do we create a different identity? So here's a few possibilities. So first of all, we need a conceptual model that helps us to step into something that's very different from our programming. We can use this conceptual model to help us begin to reprogram the identity that we currently live in. And we need to utilize this, the ability that we have to choose. So that's very important. The default mode network, this identity, this unconscious, subconscious identity does not have power of choice. Can you think about that? When we were young children, we were just open and vulnerable, and we took on the world around us. And that's how we just soaked in the beliefs and the thoughts, the programming of our environment. There was no conscious choice. So this conscious choice doesn't come on board until later, but that is what we have now to be able to help us leverage ourselves out of this programming. And we also have access to a higher intelligence or a different area of our brain that houses the capacity to access this higher intelligence. So some of you may be thinking, well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to create a different identity. I don't know how to create a different reality. Are you sure we can really do that? So the one thing I want to say is that brain science has shown us that where the brain focuses, those synaptic connections are strengthened. So as we go down and around some of our automatic programming thinking, that's why we continue to recreate the realities that we're experiencing. When we intentionally begin to shift that thinking and do that in a repetitive way, we actually begin to strengthen some of the synapses in the brain through that repetitive use. And these, we have to become very intentional about what are the synapses that we want to strengthen in the brain. So how might this work? Okay, so here we are. This is who we are. We're this, well, this is like who we are. How are you? I'm fine. It's just ourselves functioning in the everyday world. And we're pretty unconscious of what is back there in our shadow or what is back there in our subconscious programming. So what is this unconscious? Well, the unconscious is everything in life that's not known or is not perceived by our conscious mind. That means our default mode network is not allowing us, it has a filter and is not allowing us to know what else might be possible. So the personality that we've created puts everything that's threatening, it's not needed for our survival as a child in our family system. It puts us into that shadow, into that unconscious place. And that unconscious part of ourselves holds all of our, what we call exiles, or all of our cultural and family aspects of self that were not allowed in our family system. So that can run the range of rage and grief, or certain capacities and talents and gifts that we have that were not part of our upbringing. So in our Western culture, that means there's a lot. So that's why there's such a huge gap. For example, the indigenous cultures where they allow for many multidimensional experiences to occur. There's a whole different way of operating in the world multidimensionally as a multidimensional human. But in our culture, it's very, very narrow focus. So basically, we develop with a sense of that we are a functioning ego with certain things that we need to do to get things done, to provide for our family and that kind of thing. Okay. So I pretty much said this. So everything that's not acceptable goes into exile. But the other thing I think that's important to emphasize is it's not just the negative aspects of what wasn't allowed in our family system. It's also the incredible gifts of play and imagination and telepathic perception and clairvoyance and intuition and instincts and ability to perceive energy, archetypes. I mean, just this very, very rich way of functioning in the world as a creative, intelligent being. Okay, so here we have it in the shadow. We have everything that was sort of dark and not okay. Maybe they're family secrets, or they're things that you weren't supposed to say, or maybe you took on your parents' rage and your parents' negativity, and all of that goes into shadow. But as you can see, so does the aspects of higher intelligence. It all goes into shadow if that was something that wasn't allowed. Or maybe we grew up in a family system where it was very, it was co-opted. So, and that's what some people might call religious abuse. So we grew up in a family where there are certain ideas about God and who we are as a child of God. And God takes on certain qualities, and we're told that there are certain rules and ways that we need to be to have God accept us in life. So then this concept of ourselves as a creative being, a higher mind, gets co-opted into something according to the bureaucracy of the religious system that we grew into, that we were raised in. So this is really important because all of this goes in here, and we don't know that. We just don't know it. We're blind to the other possibilities of what life might have to offer. So here we have just basic description of here's you and me stuck in our subconscious programming, which is very limited. And this is, an example of what we might be experiencing because of our programming. We experience a lot of shoulds. We should be a certain way. Things aren't possible. We can't do this. We may be experiencing limited or poor relationships. We certainly might have a very bad self-image, like that we're not worthy, not deserving, not trustworthy. And we walk around with a negative voice and don't feel very confident about ourselves. So that's being stuck in the default mode. Okay, and notice that while that's happening, while we are here, this is still very present. So higher mind, creative intelligence, higher capacities are always present. They've never gone away. They're always here. We just are not aware of them because of the programming. It's cut us off from our perception of our inner divine mind, our inner magnificence. Because we're blind to it, even though it's here, it's always here, because we're blind to it, then the only thing we know to do in our desperation to feel better about ourselves is to start working on our issues, to start trying to fix what we think is wrong with us. Okay, trying to fix what we think is wrong with us. And that perpetuates, because of the law of thinking, which is one of the laws that we'll be learning about in the manifestation in this manifestation course, this law of thinking, so that energy follows thought, thought directs energy. So as we continue to work on our issues, thinking that we're making things better, in actuality, we're perpetuating the issues. And that is the sad story, the tragic fact of why so many people spend years in therapy and don't get very far, especially if you're spending an hour talking about what's wrong. Okay, talking about what's wrong. So at some point, we begin to wake up to the fact that this is present. This split begins to dissolve and go away, and we have this big aha. Now we can begin to start utilizing a different method of working with ourselves. Synchronicities might come in, all sorts of things, coincidences, things start to happen. We start to wake up. Okay, so this approach that we're working with in this class is three-pronged. So we're not throwing away our therapeutic tools, okay? We also have access to legal psychedelics, but we really want to begin to understand the laws and the higher mind and the way that these laws are working throughout our lives so that we can use them intentionally to get the results that we're wanting, because really that's what we were doing over here. We were trying to get results. We just, because of the way the law works and because we didn't understand the law, because we were ignorant of the law, we thought that we were doing it right. We thought we were focusing on our issues and making things better, when in fact, we were focusing on our issues and making things worse, or just keeping them repeating over and over again. It's when we begin to open up and see that there's something else available to us here, our higher mind, our creative intelligence. Okay, now we can begin to utilize this area of our psyche in service to our desire or to our soul's calling and to our soul purpose. All right. So I'd like you to take a minute, just pause, if you would, and summarize in one phrase what you would call the experience of your default mode network. So we kind of all have a way that that the default mode is a foundation, or it sort of holds a certain viewpoint about ourselves in the world. And if you can begin to identify, if you were to put that in a one-sentence phrase, that it describes the overarching theme of your default mode, what would it be? So for me, is I'm a rat in a rat hole. That's what I kind of always experienced as a child. I don't know where it came from, but that was my experience. For some of us, it might be I don't belong, or everyone is better than me, or I'm ugly, or I'm stupid. And I certainly had those too. Then you want to take a minute, and you can just pause the recording and go ahead and become aware of what that is and write it down, because that is what you're going to start paying attention to. That's how you're going to know that that's where you are in your consciousness. Okay. All right. So you've got that. And now the question that we need to ask ourselves is, well, how do we get from this default mode to higher mind? So the first step is obviously to recognize that we have a higher mind. So I want you all to just take a minute and think about, how do you know that that's true? How do you know that you have a higher mind? How do you know that you are a creative intelligence? Did you have an experience at some point in your life that elucidated that fact for you? Do you have just a sense of a belief or a faith that you don't know really where it comes from? Maybe you were taught certain things about this. So take a minute, notice, how do you know that you do have a creative intelligence? So I want to read this quote from Neville Goddard, who's a brilliant mystic and who is one of the fathers of this manifesting world. Okay, law of attraction. He has many, many books. You can find them easily. This quote, it's only by a change of consciousness, by actually changing your concept of yourself, that you can build more stately mansions, the manifestations of higher and higher concepts. By manifesting is meant experiencing the results of these concepts in your world. It is of vital importance to understand clearly just what consciousness is. The reason lies in the fact that consciousness is the one and only reality. It is the first and only cause, substance of the phenomenon of life. Nothing has existence for man save through the consciousness he has of it. Therefore, it is to consciousness you must turn, for it is the only foundation on which the phenomena of life can be explained. If we accept the idea of a first cause, it would follow that the evolution of that cause would never result in anything foreign to itself. That is, if the first cause substance is light, all of its evolutions, fruits, and manifestations would remain light. The first cause substance being consciousness, all its evolutions, fruits, and phenomena must remain consciousness. All that could be observed would be a higher or lower form of variation of the same thing. In other words, if your consciousness is the only reality, it also must be the only substance. Consequently, what appears to you as circumstances, conditions, and even material objects are really only the products of your own consciousness. Nature, then, as a thing or a complex of things external to your mind, must be rejected. You and your environment cannot be regarded as existing separately. You and your world are one. Okay. This is a very radical way of viewing life in our culture. And so basically, the way I interpret this is everything external to me is really a projection of my own consciousness. Okay, so therefore, if I want to change something out there, I have to change it internally first, which means I've got to do some looking. So when we do shadow work, we can use our external environment to look at what is being projected on the screen of our reality so that we can utilize it to change the inside, because we can't always see what's behind there and what's inside. It gets projected out and we can see it by looking at it externally. All right, so that's the foundation of this work. Pete Smith, in his book, Quantum Consciousness, says, we are consciousness that is far beyond the limitations of human form. We are each a quantum being that lives all the possibilities of who we really are. We are each a quantum being that lives all the possibilities of who we really are. I think that's totally amazing. So what that says to me is that anything I might dream up is already existent, perhaps in another dimension, in another reality. So we want to consider that we are not just this projected reality, but this is the one that's getting focused into the world right now. But we can also utilize this concept to look for other projections and other dimensions. So those of you who have done some of the work in PsyAlchemy, you'll know that we do some of that work in that program. Okay, do we stretch the boundaries of our current reality, or do we reject the experience and stay in the blindness of the prevailing mindsets? So this is the question that each of you has to entertain. Will I stretch the boundaries of my current reality? Or do I reject the experience of the larger consciousness of myself and stay in the blindness of the prevailing mindset? Very profound question that we each have to ask. So along those lines, just to reiterate that this dimensional world, this higher intelligence, this world of creativity, imagination, play, possibility, and potential has been put into exile, has been exiled and into the shadow by our culture. So it's not the norm. We don't see it, and we therefore don't learn about it, and we don't know how to utilize it. All right. So steps, beginning steps. We have to recognize that we are higher mind, that we are creative intelligence. We are always creating, whether we are intentionally doing it or not. So the law of energy, that law of thinking says energy follows thought, thought directs energy. So if you are not intentionally creating a different thought in your mind, then you are going to default back to the default mode network and to that theme of beliefs that you took on as a child, that you have now identified that this is the theme of your default mode network. In my case, it's that I'm a rat in a rat hole. Okay. So remember that, because every time you begin to feel that sense, you'll know that that's your default mode network coming on board. It's not true, and that's the key. This is not truth. It's just what the default mode network has learned about who you are as a person. Okay, so if imagination is the tool of the soul, which it is, so the soul utilizes imagination to begin to see itself, to know itself, to create through itself. Okay, that's why we were given imagination, so that we can use imagination to create something that isn't already here. Most of us misuse our imagination. Why? Because the default mode is constantly co-opting this imagination. We are always imagining. I want you to go through your day this week and just notice how your mind is imagining constantly. It's imagining, it's imagining, it's imagining. You're imagining things about your environment. You're imagining things about other people in your life. You're imagining things about yourself. You're always imagining things. And what we want to do is become aware of this imagination. We start using this imagination intentionally. So when you notice that you're imagining something that's in alignment with your default mode, you need to begin to use that imagination and change that around. What else could I imagine in this situation? The reason why this happens is because we're ignorant of our mind power. We don't know how much power we have as creators. And because we don't know the power that we have as creators, we believe we're victims. And we project the feeling of being a victim outside onto the external world. Other people are doing it to me. The culture is doing it to me. The interest rates are rising. Therefore, I'm a victim of the interest rates. I'm a victim of the government. I'm a victim, whatever your victimization is, that is you being ignorant of the power that you have, okay, as a creative being. Now, one of my teachers said, you create your own economy. We are not victim to the economy out there. We are creating that economy. If we are thinking scarcity, if we are thinking, oh my God, interest rates have gone up, will I ever sell my house? What will I do? Then just know that that is you creating yourself to be the victim of an external economy. So this is, again, very radical thinking. But if we are to utilize the manifestation tools that we're going to learn, we have to understand that this is a very, very crucial, important point, that we have more power than we realize. Okay. In order to utilize that power, we have to learn how to master our mind to focus on what we want. And that we can create anything, as long as it's in alignment with the laws of the universe. We can create anything we want if we understand these laws and how they operate. And what is so brilliant about this law is it's always working. And it doesn't matter how wounded you think you are, how broken you think you are. So when I was first learning how to work with these laws, and I was doing it without knowing what I was doing, I was just learning that, wow, if I changed my thinking, things would change. And I didn't know that they were laws that I was working with, but that's what was happening. And I was extremely wounded back then. I was very broken. I was I had a debilitating eating disorder. And I was almost incapacitated, where I couldn't function in the world. I couldn't even earn a living. And yet I was able, by changing the way I was thinking, I was able to change my environment. And that's how I began to understand how the power of these laws were working through my life. It wasn't until later on that I began to harness this power more intentionally. And it wasn't until recently that I decided to come out of the closet and actually bring these laws to others, because because I'm passionate, because these are the tools, the laws that really impacted change in my life. I actually never did the therapeutic work. Okay, I became a therapist and I became a somatic therapist, but the changes that I experienced the most in my life were because of the laws of manifestation. Okay. So this is the myth. The myth is that we have to heal ourselves first. We have to fix ourselves first before we can live out our soul purpose, or we can have what we want out of life. This is nothing but a bunch of bull. Okay. Because the reality is every single one of us is already whole. We're already living at our full creative intelligence right now, whether we're aware of it or not. So either the creative intelligence is being co-opted by the default mode network beliefs, and that's what we're living out, or we're using it intentionally to change something so that we can move towards what our soul desires. So I wanted to tell you a few stories. These are examples of the ways in which I was able to manifest what would otherwise have been impossible in my life. So it was in my 20s when I had a really severe eating disorder and severe body image issues. This actually was the very, very beginning, and I don't remember how it was. I think it was one of my teachers said to me, "You're beautiful, Jane. Why are you so why do you feel so ugly? Why is this always such a problem for you?" And I just could not comprehend what she was saying. And I remember going home and I looked in the mirror and I thought, I was really trying to figure this out. I am beautiful. I don't get it. So I started saying that to myself. I love you, Jane. You're beautiful. And that's all I did. I did it one time in the morning when I woke up every day. And it took a long time in terms of what is actually possible if you use these tools well. It was about 2 years, but I remember waking up and all of a sudden my self-image was different. I also healed an eating disorder when at that time nobody knew that it was possible to do that. And I was able to do that because I was committed. And I had a vision. I had a vision. I had a strong desire to be a normal eater. I had a vision. I made a commitment and I did what it took. I just kept seeing that vision pulled me forward. I kept seeing myself as a normal eater. And I made the commitment to do what it was I had to do. And I followed my intuition every minute of the way. I was able to turn scarcity into prosperity the same way. So I was a young therapist. I was experienced, but I was young in terms of starting a private practice. And I was focusing on eating disorder recovery because that's what I had had success with. And so I was also very passionate about bringing this great news that it was possible to recover from an eating disorder to my clients. And so people started to come to me and I started to build this practice, but I never quite had enough income. I just could not get quite enough people into my practice to enable me to relax around money. And I was listening to Louise Hay one day, and she said, she was teaching prosperity thinking, prosperity affirmations. And I thought this was a bunch of bull because I was a sophisticated therapist and I had done all this work and I knew what I was doing. And I was at my wit's end about it, though. I was in constant fear of what was going to happen. I was the sole provider of my family. And so I said, what the heck, I'm going to do it. And so I made the promise to myself. I made the commitment. I made the promise that I was going to change every thought in my head. And I was going to change every scarcity thought in my head. I was going to change it to I am prospering because I couldn't see beyond that. I had no idea what it meant. I couldn't even name numbers. That was nothing. All I knew, that was the only thing I could do. I hung on to this one phrase, I am prospering. And in between sessions with clients, the racing scarcity thinking would start coming in and I would start stopping it. Like I was standing in front of a freight train and I would stop that thought and I would say, I am prospering, I am prospering. And that was my motto. And I did that for 3 weeks, tenaciously, every day, persistently, stopping every scarcity thought. And it was 3 weeks. All of a sudden, I don't know how it happened. My practice doubled. I had enough clients, I had enough money, and that was it. I never did anything else. I never did any marketing, any networking, nothing. So that was, I think, the biggest piece for me that really drove it home. This was not something that we were going to play around with. Okay. So then it went on and I went on to do other things like buying a house with no money down. I didn't have the money down for a payment. So I bought the house. I was committed. I had the desire. I made the commitment. I woke up one morning. This was the day I'm going to buy a house. I found a realtor. We went out. We found the house. As soon as I made the decision to buy the house, somehow or other, the down payment showed up. And then I love the story of I really did go from bankruptcy to a net worth of 300,000 in about 3 months. And that was a little bit easier to do but it was more about trusting in the good of the universe, even though I was going through a scary situation. It was like during the time of the September 2001, 9/13, the fall of the Twin Towers, and our business was going under and we couldn't sustain it. And I kept sitting down in my backyard and I kept asking, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I was listening to higher mind. I was listening to higher intelligence, and higher mind was telling me, do nothing. Just do nothing. And I would do this every day. I'd go sit in the backyard and I would meditate and I would ask, what do I do? Should I go out get a job? What should I do? And I kept hearing, do nothing. And so I would learn to trust that voice. So that was the voice of the higher mind coming through intuition. And I trusted that. And again, it was within 3 months that all of a sudden, the whole real estate market changed, and the equity in our house shot up from 20,000 to 300,000. That's where I was. I had that equity in the house, and I didn't do anything else except listen to my higher intuitive mind. So let's see. I skipped ahead here. Higher mind capacities that we're going to be working with further. So desire, longing, and discontents. So in order to begin to even activate this law, you've got to know what you want. So I knew I wanted to be a normal eater. I knew I wanted to support my family and not be scared of not having money, right? I knew I wanted to buy a house. It was very, very strong desires. I don't know where those desires were coming from. They were probably coming from my soul. They were pulling me forward. There was a longing connected to them, and there was a discontent. I was discontent with the present situation I was in, so I wanted something more. Then I began to implement the power of choice, to make decisions, okay, to have something and go towards something rather than keep going back over what the default mode was telling me over and over again. We use the power of our imagination to move us forward towards what we want rather than pull us back. We really listen to our intuition and we stay in that inspired frame of mind. And we're going to go into this more and more throughout the next few weeks. So, okay, for this week, I want you to really identify a desire. If you don't know what it is, focus on something you're longing for, something you're discontented about. You can also do that bonus sheet template for people who don't know what they want. There are a lot of really good exercises in there that'll start triggering you into thinking about what you want. And remember, the conscious mind. So this is a great quote: conscious mind, thinking mind, educated mind, intellect. You have the power to choose what you think about. You can accept or reject any idea that is in harmony or not in harmony with your desire. So that is from the Procter & Gamble Institute. That was Bob Proctor. And many of you may know he was in the movie The Secret, and he is one of the proponents of the law of attraction and of this work. And he's no longer with us. However, this was one of his students who are now teaching his courses. And this is a quote from the Procter & Gamble Institute. You have the power to choose what you think about. In other words, you don't have to let your thoughts run you, but you do need to become aware that your thinking is running you, and then you can accept or reject any idea that comes in your head, okay, if it's in harmony or not in harmony with what you desire. So that's how we use the power of choice. So I want you to just notice this week, what are you thinking? Is the thinking your default mode just running its course, or are you intentionally choosing to think something else? And you can literally just put in a different thought, just like I did. I just put in the thought of I am prospering every time a scarcity thought would come in. That's all I did. I inserted I am prospering, and that's what changed the reality for me at that time. Okay. And I think we just said this. You do this many times a day. You can use gratitude. I'm changing this, what I don't like, into a gratitude. I have gratitude for this thing because I know that it's It's changing now in front of my eyes because I'm thinking differently. So however you want to find it, we're going to go more into gratitude in a little bit, but just focus on gratitude. Whenever you notice a negative thought come in, switch it to a gratitude for anything that's in your life, and that will begin to immediately change the energy. Okay, so you're using your imagination in service of your higher mind. So you want to begin to imagine who you're going to become. Imagine you having that which you are desiring. You're using your imagination in service to your higher mind, in service to your desire, versus in service to your default mode thinking.